On the pandemic front this year, efforts to embrace life amid COVID-19 continue worldwide, with Korea ending 2022 with a roadmap to lifting the indoor mask mandate early next year. So what is the fate of indoor mask requirements here in Korea? Why are some schools in the US calling for the return of indoor face masks? And how is China's sudden shift away from zero COVID looking to affect the region? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we shed light on COVID-19 and our campaign against it this year. For more, I have Professor Jung Ki-suck from Hallym University, who is also the chairman of the Advisory Committee for Infectious Disease Response here in the country. Professor Jung, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Peter Chin-hong at the University of California, San Francisco, live on the line. Professor Chin-hong, again, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure, Sunny. Thank you.
Right, Professor Jung, we'll start here then. This past Christmas was probably our first since the start of the pandemic that Koreans were able to enjoy in the absence of restrictions on gatherings. Do you believe, Professor Jung, that our widespread immunity perhaps made this possible despite our relatively high daily tallies?
Sure. Since January 1st, Korean people have got infected about 28 million. And also about 30 million shots were delivered to Korean people this year. So many are infected and many are have a shot. And because of two things, many people have an immunity so far. But as you know, the immunity lasts shorter. It lasts longer and longer. So it usually lasts 3 months to 6 months. So maybe many of them wouldn't have immunity at the moment. But according to winter surge in Korea, the infected people are increasing, and according to intensive immunization campaign by government, the people who got the improved vaccine is increasing. So because of two things, again, we have many immune people in Korea. So that's why we were enjoying Christmas season without having too much worrying about that.
Right, which I must say was great to be able to enjoy Christmas in the absence of restrictions. Professor Chin-hong, over in the US, 2022 marked the easing of several pandemic-related restrictions, including the mask mandate over in the US. Now, that being said, in recent days I hear that there have been some recommendations for their return. What more can you tell us, Professor Chin-hong?
Well, Sunny, the recommendations for return to masking in some schools has been really spotty. In some jurisdictions, Philadelphia, Boston is talking about it. There's been some areas in California. And the science is clear. Masking in schools do reduce the risk of transmission, both to teachers as well as to students. But the political willpower isn't there, and it's been very divisive, so it may not come back in a widespread fashion.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Jung, health authorities here in the country say that Korea's indoor mask mandate may be lifted at the end of January, at the earliest that is. Could you explain this timing for us?
Well, there are 4 conditions to lift mask mandate in Korea. It is well known that if you have a decrease of confirmed cases and critically ill patients and also death, we are very comfortable to go for a lifting mask mandate. Another factor is there should be a more immunized in high-risk patients particularly. High risk means people who are over 60 and people who are living in the nursing homes and convalescent hospitals and immune-compromised hosts altogether. We are estimating those people about 14 million. So if they are well immunized by vaccination, we could safely go for a mask mandate lifting. And another one is medical preparedness. We are focusing on a critical care unit, and the reference value is more than 50% are remained for a critically ill patient. So one out of 4 factors is already satisfied. We have 60% of critically ill unit. But another one is just a tendency of confirmed cases and deaths, and also immunized one. So if all high-risk people got it vaccinated by the end of this year, then you may go for a mask lifting in 2 weeks' time, because after 2 weeks we have very high antibodies in one's body. And if you have peak time in a week or so, then we'll see a stationary or a decreasing tendency of confirmed cases and accordingly critically ill and death. Then we can go for a mask lifting. So that will be by the end of January. It's not impossible, but if another factor comes, like outside factors, or if you have a longer surge at this time, then we may not lift the mask mandating by the end of January.
Right, I see. Professor Jung, Korea's roadmap to lifting its indoor mask mandate has actually divided its medical community. Now, based on America's own experience, what are your thoughts on Korea's plans?
Well, I think it's thoughtful, it's multi-pronged. I would say that some of the lessons we've learned is that we need to continue to prioritize access to early treatment, and that requires continued investment in diagnostics, because you have to be positive within 5 days to then be eligible for treatment. The second issue is that, when you drop the mask mandate, it comes with other side effects, like having more flu, RSV, and other illnesses that are respiratory viruses that drive hospitalizations. So I think that is something that we've learned. And finally, just because the mask mandate has been dropped doesn't mean that it's still not a good idea to wear masks. So I think there's been a focus from a mandate to a strong recommendation. And in some settings, like where I work in the hospitals, mask mandates never went away. They probably won't go away for a long time, because we take care of very vulnerable patients. So I think there will be continued mandates in some microenvironments.
Right, I see. And beyond the mask mandate, Professor Jung, the ruling People Power Party had earlier proposed the isolation period for COVID-19 patients be shortened from 7 days to 3 days. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, it's too early to discuss about that. I think it's not the proper time to reduce or to shorten the isolation period, because Korean Disease Prevention and Control Agency had a study recently on patients with BA.5 and its variants. And they first, and they second, third, and fourth after symptoms appear. And what they found was at the end of 7 days, still they have culture positive patients among them, at least 10% or 20%. And if you shorten the isolation time to 3 days, at least more than 50% of them, the confirmed cases, will have a virus in their body and can transmit to other people. So if your colleagues sitting next to you in the workplace, in the office, and she or he has come to a workplace in 4 days after 3 days isolation, and he or she is still producing virus to infect you, would you like to have a lunch with him or her?
I don't think so.
Never. So it's too early. So more people should be immunized, and we have a more convenience to get any kind of a drug, or possibly the virulence will be lower than current one. So in that case, we can shorten the isolation period, and that's the way we are going for.
Right, I see. And Professor Jung, is mandating the isolation period, you suppose, for COVID-19 patients essential even as we enter the 4th year of this pandemic, do you think?
Well, that's a very controversial era right now, Sunny, all around the world. There's some countries like Australia, Denmark, South Africa that have done away with any isolation requirements. But in the US, we're still sticking to 5, and people are using testing as a way to exit isolation earlier. Of course, it results in much more testing used. But nevertheless, I think where it may settle down to is in some environments, the risk of transmission is going to be higher if you exit earlier. So like in hospitals, for example, there are much stringent requirements for back to work versus the general society. But I think in general, the world is moving towards a place where you stay home when you're ill, you go to work when you're feeling better. But again, this is a period of transition. period of flux, and in the US is still sticking to about 5 days.
Right, I see. So 5 days of isolation for COVID-19 patients over in the US. Professor Jung, beyond national borders, there's another major development with regard to COVID-19 is the abrupt easing of its zero COVID policy. I'm talking about neighboring China, of course. Now, according to Bloomberg, China may be witnessing 1 million infections over 24 hours, every 24 hours that is, including 5,000 fatalities. How does this particular reality look to affect regional efforts, including those of Korea, to live with COVID-19?
Well, historically, the COVID-19 started in China, and we were affected as soon as China broke out after one month after. And again, this time it's very serious. We have a large explosion in China, and one of my friends is running a small business in China, and I asked him what's the condition there. And his employees has about 60, and more than 30 has got infected recently. So everybody who got infected is missing the work. So I think it's serious. And on top of that, in Japan, which is another neighboring country, the death number is increasing. It's more than Korea recently, and the prevalence is higher than Korea. So two countries beside us, China and Japan, has a all higher number of patients and deaths at the moment. So it is very serious. So I think we should keep vigilance on a China situation, also a Japan situation. So interestingly, I met a journalist from Bloomberg 2 months ago. She flew from United States to Korea and had an interview with her. And at that time, I mentioned the China risk. And she asked why. So I answered two things. The one, sudden explosion of China. And many people are coming to and from China because of tourism and the business. And they might carry a large amount of virus in huge number of commuters. So that risk is one. The another risk is maybe they have an emergence of variant. So subvariant of a BA1, BA5, it doesn't matter at all as far as I'm concerned. But if you have new variants, next Greek alphabet is a phi. If you have a phi, then it might detour any kind of immunization we have established here in Korea. It might have drug resistance. It might have a very higher transmission rate. So it could be another disaster if we find a very important variant in China. So we must be very concerned about that and keep focusing on how the situation goes in China.
Right, I see. And staying with the danger or risks of variants, Professor Chen-Hong, what are your thoughts on the risk of new variants emerging amid this rampant spread in neighboring China?
I think, Sunny, the risk is very high that a new variant will develop in China. After all, Chinese population, 1.4 billion people, very high transmission rates right now. And we know that every time the virus makes a copy of itself, it's not perfect. It's like you have a bad photocopy machine at work. Every time a large country has had an explosion of cases, there's a new variant. India with Delta, South Africa with Omicron. So it makes sense that we will see a new variant from China. So a lot of countries are actually starting to do surveillance on visitors from that region to maybe track the development of some of these new variants. Like Professor Chung said, it will be a new variant, probably a pi, a rho, a sigma. But with increasing immunity in some countries, hopefully even a scary variant would not result in as much damage as early in the pandemic.
Right, and hopefully you are right, Professor Chen-Hong. All right, then thank you very much for your time and your thoughts, Professor Chen-Hong, and Professor Jung here in the studio. Thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition. Tomorrow, that is Thursday, we shed light on the economic headlines of 2022. Join us then. Thank you for now.